movement panel for WinCon. I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, I will introduce myself. My mom says that's good manners. I'm Dr. Shamika Mitchell, Assistant Professor of English at Rockland Community College, State University, New York. I am going to start all the way to my right with Maia who is a GATE demonstration leader for English and Language Arts in San Bernardino Unified School District. She is also a member of the rigorous curriculum design team, as well as the curriculum instruction and assessment committee for the secondary education department. Maia also serves as an adjunct professor with graduate studies focused on African American speculative fiction and the resurgence of African deities within the genre. Welcome, Maia. Next, we have Tim Fielder, who is a Glyph Award-winning illustrator, concept designer, cartoonist, and animator born and raised in Mississippi, and is a current Harlem resident, correct?
Yes.
Neighbors in Harlem? He has worked over the years in storyboarding, film, visual development, gaming, comics, and animation industries for clients as varied as Marvel Comics, The Village Voice, TriStar Pictures, Ubisoft Entertainment, and others. He also is an educator for institutions such as the New York Film Academy and Howard University. He is also known for his TEDx talk on the subject of Afrofuturism and for founding Afrofuturefest. If you missed that, it was the first branded collective group of creators of color in New York Comic-Con history, and it was dope. This was 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
His project, Maddie's Rocket, is a product of his company, Diesel Funk Studios. Welcome, Tim. Next up, we have such an enlightened Twitterer. I love his tweets. Daniel Jose Older, who is a Brooklyn-based musician, writer, editor, composer, and author of the Bone Street Rumba novels, including Midnight Taxi Tango and Half Resurrection Blues, and the YA novel Shadow Shaper. He has been nominated for the Kirkus Prize, the Locust and World Fantasy Awards, and the Andre Norton Award. Shadow Shaper was named the New York Times Best Book of the Year. Welcome. Yeah. Next, we have Grayson, who is a Brooklyn-based filmmaker and creator of the comic book Wigama. As an MFA thesis candidate at New York University's graduate film program, Che has written, directed, and produced several short films and has worked under the mentorship of Spike Lee and Casey Lemons. She's a 2016 TED resident with her TED Talk, The Superhero We Need, focusing on comics and social justice. Che currently works at Teen Vogue as an associate video producer, and you also had an award that for a video that you did, right? That won the competition. It was the girls playing double dutch. I forget the name of the video. Breathe, Relax. Breathe, Relax. Yeah. Welcome, Che. Last but not least is the person who helped to convene this panel. I am very excited to have with us the masterful cookie maker, comics creator, critiquer, Maia Crown Williams. I bow to the crown. CEO and founder of Emanate Enterprises, Midwest Ethnic Convention for Comics and Arts, MECACON. MECACON International Film Festival, Cooking Ciphers, I didn't mention the cookies, right? The Cutaway, Crown's Royalties, and co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, which is a national movement, an international movement. Crown is also an executive assistant to many different businesses, artists, and events in the Metro Detroit area, constantly repping the 313 Crown.
Yeah!
There is the possibility possibility that we will have another person joining us, but we're going to get started in the interest of time. So, this is our panel for today, and my first question is a bit of a heavy one. What do the speculative arts mean to you? We going there. What do the speculative arts mean to you? We only have one mic, so we're going to have to pass the mic. It's a bit of a cipher here.
Yeah, it's just merely a way of boiling down race, history, politics, social mores, gender, all those different elements into a mode that is kind of aside from reality, and you can make stuff up, but at the same time, you can shed some light onto it as the world as it actually exists. That's what it means for me. And carpeted.
So speculative arts for me is kind of the natural life insurance policy, in that it using the elements of history and identity and imagination, we are able to create characters and worlds that we acknowledge their existence in a mainstream world that never acknowledged it, but then also ensure a future for what we're creating, what we're thinking about for future generations.
I want all these answers. I would say it's an opportunity for an adventure, in the sense of, I think we're often given the false dichotomy of it either has to say something or it has to be fun. And that's a lie. You know, that's a lie that we've been told over and over about art. If it's political, it's automatically didactic. And I think speculative art particularly gives us an opportunity to really, like you said, tackle race, like think about the future, imagine ourselves in a future that otherwise hasn't allowed us to be there. And I think it's also about valuing the history of that and the history of the different forms of resistance that we've had as folks of color in this country. And I always really trace so much back to the comment by W.B. Du Bois, and that as like this really future-thinking form of speculative fiction, and that also says something so deep about, you know, the world and politics and race in America in a short story. So I feel like, as a creator of color, as someone who is brown and not black, but always traces the lineage of the work we're doing as people of color who care about the world, to the Black Arts Movement and to Afrofuturism, it's really important that we honor that, otherwise it gets swallowed up. And the work of like people, you know, like people who've been doing it all along, saying something deep and opening our imaginations at the same time, that's really what we're here to do.
For me, speculative arts, when I look at and dissect that term, speculative is the realm of possibility. And when I think speculative arts, I'm thinking of the realm of possibility, what could have been and what can be. So when I get into speculative arts, that's what I'm really looking at, is trying to understand what could have been and what can be, and seeing the future and the past, and all of it is one kind of working, moving piece. And when you move one piece, you shift one piece, you kind of change the world. And I really love the idea of playing with the world and playing with the ideas of histories and futures and kind of intermingling those things together, because it creates a realm of possibility where there is absolutely no limitation, and there is that adventure, and there is that excitement about it. It gives you something to look forward to and something to reflect upon simultaneously, which I think is something that's very unique to speculative fiction.
One of the reasons why I focused and I started working with Dr. Anderson with Black Speculative Arts Movement, or BSAM, is because I like the aspect of being futuristic with politics, being futuristic with social justice, being futuristic with cooperative economics and social and ethical sustainability. Being just black be black, period. Any type of phrase that helps me be more black be black, I'm all for that. That's why I'm here up here.
Okay.
They're asking, I'm gonna let her answer.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce her first.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I told you that we have one more person coming. We have Dr. Cherie Ann Turpin, who is an Afrofuturism scholar, poet, and associate professor in the Department of English at the University of the District of Columbia. Her research areas include African diaspora studies, gender and sexuality studies, world literature, multicultural American literature, popular culture, and film studies. Her publications include the book How Three Black Women Writers Combine Spiritual and Sensual Love, Rhetorically Transcending the Boundaries of Language, as well as several journal articles. And the question that I asked is, what does speculative art mean to you?
What does speculative art mean? Well, I mean, I think of Jewel Gomez. I think of Mabel Hoskinson. I know we all think of Octavia Butler, God rest her soul. And I think of possibilities, expanding our notions, for instance, our notions about gender, our notions about bodies, right? We're already kind of seeing this. I mean, the idea or notion that being online can expand our notions of who gets to be counted, who gets to be heard, who gets to be seen. And so when I look at fiction written by speculative authors within the African diaspora, and I think about Octavia Butler with her Dawn series, who made it a point of expanding our notions of, for instance, what is sex? You know, what does it mean to procreate? What does it mean to replicate yourself or the sense of self, and expanding beyond, you know, the limitations. And for people of the African diaspora especially, this is important. Historically speaking, when it came to science fiction, that tended to assume that the audience was predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly upper class. The problem is that it was the ideal or notion that in order for you to be a part of the future, you needed to be part of a particular set of folk, instead of recognizing that the future is all of us. And so for me, speculative is looking at possibilities of a future, including all of us, including white guys, yes, absolutely, but not exclusively at the expense of all others. And that means actually moving beyond what we used to see with Star Trek, for instance. That means looking beyond what Hollywood tends to feed us up until very recently. This idea or notion that people who are smart, people who work with computers, people who travel beyond, beyond the stars. But the writers that I look at are also looking at the ways in which African-centered cultures and African diasporic cultures, including those old gods and goddesses, well, how do they figure? Is that also technology? Well, if you're a person who's into speculative fiction, of course you're going to look at those. Imagine seeing gods and goddesses show up. Well, maybe, in ancient times we thought of gods and goddesses as gods and goddesses. Well, maybe they're alien beings. Well, I look at writers like Mabel Hoskinson actually saying, okay, I'm going to create a fictional universe in which you have Oshun, you have, Orishas and Gawaz and Pungus show up. And they're alien beings? Yes, absolutely. And they're interacting with human beings. And so I'm not sure if that's what you all were looking for, but that's what I'm actually looking at right now. So,
Okay,
all right.
thank you. Did everyone get a chance to see Brittany Cooper's TED Talk about the racial politics of time? No? I'm going to play a little bit of it for you. I'm setting it up. Let's see if we can get just a little bit of volume.
The time has a race. A race in the contemporary way that we
Here we go. All right. Can everybody hear? So this is Dr. Brittany Cooper.
As I told you, the time has a race. A race in the contemporary way that we understand race in the United States. Typically, we talk about race in terms of black and white issues. In the African American communities from which I come, we have a long-standing, multi-generational joke about what we call CP time, or colored people's time. Now, we no longer refer to African Americans as colored, but this long-standing joke about our perpetual lateness to church, to cookouts, to family events, and even to our own funerals remains. I personally am a stickler for time. It's almost as if my mother, when I was growing up, said, "We will not be those black people." So we typically arrive to events 30 minutes early. But today, I want to talk to you more about the political nature of time. For if time had a race, it would be white. White people own time. I know, making such quote-unquote incendiary statements makes us uncomfortable. Haven't we moved past the point where race really matters? Isn't race a heavy-handed concept? Shouldn't we go ahead with our enlightened progressive selves and relegate useless concepts like race to the dustbins of history? How will we ever get over racism if we keep on talking about race? Perhaps we should lock up our concepts of race in a time capsule, bury them, and dig them up in 1,000 years, parent them with the clearly more enlightened, raceless versions of ourselves that belong to the future. But you see there, that desire to mitigate the impact of race and racism shows up in how we attempt to manage time, in the ways we narrate history, in the ways we attempt to shove the negative truths of the present into the past, in the ways we attempt to argue that the future that we hope for is the present in which we're currently living.
Okay, that's a lot of lines of play. So, according to Dr. Cooper, and this is from October 2016, it's a very recent talk, that white people own time, and that white people control time. And towards the end of her talk, she also makes the statement that people of color are always operating out of time. And so when we talk about speculative art, I'm curious what your thoughts are about how time functions in relation to race, and what that means for the work that you are creating. I know in your TED Talk, you mentioned Uhura and Lando, right? But beyond that, right, the issue of, who controls time and how subversive it is just to even imagine people of color in this framework of being outside of time, or somehow being, I would say, subversive of this narrative, this very white narrative of time. What does that mean for the work that you create and the work that you research?
Well, I've been in the game for a while, and I've found that time has to be both linear, chronological, what happens first, second, third, and so on, and nonlinear. So just to the point of my career, I have kind of revisited a lot of concepts that didn't get a lot of traction 20 years, 30 years ago. Now that they are getting traction, that's because it's not just a matter of, how much time has passed. It's also a matter of, are people ready for what it is that I'm doing? I envy folks who work in speculative fiction because their stuff is protected somewhat by words. Words are beautiful because you can describe what it is you want. It's one thing to describe, Nat Turner taking revenge. It's another thing to show it. And, it's not the most profitable. It's not the most profitable endeavor, but it is necessary, and I find that as of late, the world has caught up. So I'm working, like I was telling Daniel here, that I have like 15 deadlines. I told myself, well, it's not true, it's really 10, and that's about it, because I'm doing projects trying to cover all of this territory, dealing specifically with retrofuturism, because my parents are in the 80s, didn't get that material, so I have to produce that material. I have to do stuff for scholars who need a visual. I love being around academic scholars who study it because they want visuals and they're not really trying to sit there and go, oh, well, you know, it's not the right time. Or they're like, can you do it for me? Sure, I'll do it.
Now, right, I need to
Yes,
get
and they want it now, so that's about the time thing again. So it's a very interesting time. Now this is also with Maia, finally got that name right. She's smiling, that must make her happy. And Ronaldo, so what they're doing with the Black Speculative Arts movement is they've kind of, I don't know why, they've kind of like given me a forum to be able to do that and to talk about visuals. And it's a pleasure to see it.
I think it's interesting what Dr. Cooper says about white people controlling time and black people being outside of it. When the more I thought about it, what it really meant to me is that white people are controlled by time and black people are not controlled by time. Also, like, that's also black and white, which I don't even know is necessarily a race thing, because what about the Asian diaspora, and you saying that they're white? So I think like a statement like that requires a TED Talk because it really requires a conversation.
Yeah.
But it is funny, and it did resonate with me because my comic is about a girl whose tears bring people back to life, and every time she uses that power, it makes her age. And so it was hard to do, it was hard to visualize. I made it into a comic and a short film. And it was very hard. It was somehow easy to conceptualize, but it was hard to convey because they thought she was time traveling. She was not. And so that's really interesting that she brought that up because it's kind of subconsciously, I guess I am, as an artist at least, not functioning within time, within that dimension. Because, and when you think of time too, you think about the trauma of slavery and how it was hundreds of years ago, get over it. No.
And she mentions
That's
that.
the time of that's the linear time of hundreds of years ago, right? And so that rings true because what was happening to her is that the emotional time was being sucked out of her because she was trying to bring somebody back, and when you're dealing with trauma and you're dealing with police brutality and you're dealing with losing somebody within the black community, it does take a non-linear time from us, but it's emotional and it's spiritual.
And this is something that Cooper also addresses. She also mentions Ta-Nehisi Coates, who at one point said that black people are always being robbed of their time. And so, I mean, it's a fascinating talk. I could play the whole thing, it's like 12 minutes. If you get a chance, check it out. But this idea that time is created through this race-specific narrative, and then everyone is somehow forced to comply to it, right? I mean, our idea of Eastern Standard Time actually only came into being in the later 19th century with the creation of the railroad, the Trans-Pacific Railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, and that everybody had different time zones. And so then they decided to come up with time. And then it's always who's in time, right? And like Africa has no history, right? And all of these kinds of racialized, politicized narratives in which time is weaponized against people of color or people on the margins. So I'm curious about the other people.
Yeah, I love the points that were brought up. And there's two things that really jump out at me with this. One is the white relationship to ghosts. The white Western, particularly, relationship to ghosts is so very different and singular, I think, in the history of the world and the world itself. Almost all of the rest of us, have a very complex and usually loving relationship to our dead. But when it comes to ghost stories in America, in this particular culture, it's almost uniformly this negative creature that jumps out and eats your brains. So a lot of my work is a reclamation of the ghost story. I love my ghosts. They have helped me be here today, and I put down food for them when I cook, and we smoke cigars when I'm confused, and we hang out. And that's how most cultures deal with our dead. But I think it says a lot about our history and our past and how we are able to confront our dead. So, if we're just constantly running away from it, I think that speaks to an inability to really be able to process all of the very, hateful and horrible things that have happened in this country in particular. So when I have characters walking down the street with their best friend who happens to be dead next to them, smoking a cigar and talking about life and solving crimes, that is very much about history literally walking with us, because it does, whether we want it to or not. Just like this idea that, slavery is a thing of the past. First of all, there is still slavery. Second of all, we're still obviously living in that shadow. And third of all, the same motherfuckers that tell us it happened a long time ago are the ones that worship the Constitution's ass. So, makes me mad. So there's that.
Don't be a tweet about this. We're going to have a Twitter thread.
Anyway, and lastly, I just want to say, we've been talking largely in terms of macro version of time. But I think the micro version of time is really rhythm. And rhythm is so fundamental to voice, which is so fundamental to us being able to be who we are on the page. In terms of, when we had this conversation about diversity in literature, and we can get into the diversity, the word diversity some other time, but the truth, really, literature that tells the truth about the fact that we exist. It's also about voice. It's not just about painting black or brown faces on white characters. It's about rhythm. It's about understanding that we have different ways of telling stories and different ways of existing in and out of time and in stories, and that a voice will come through differently. All those things they can't just be a simple, like Band-Aid, right? It's going to be lots of different answers to that. So my narrator voice, when it's not in the first person, it's third person narrator, so it's an omnipresent narrator. It doesn't necessarily still speak in a traditionally white voice, because that's not always who we are. So I think we have to be able to get into those complex levels, and that includes rhythm.
Two things. One is a extremely short thing that came to my head. The last Christmas, I think it was Christmas or whatever party that my mother decided to host. My mother loves to cook. And so my aunt has a reputation of always showing up an hour late. And so my mother had the party scheduled for 3. She told my aunt 2. My aunt arrived at 3 on time and was highly pissed. Highly pissed, but that's their relationship. They always clenchers on each other. But the thing that really came to mind for me is that word history or her story. Who gets to tell the stories of the past? Who gets to be written into history? Who gets to be written into epics that are supposed to quote unquote stand the test of time? One of the things that's beaten into our heads when you do graduate school is to try to find someone to focus on who's going to stand the test of time, which is a not so subtle way of maintaining a particular canon, which is usually hetero, male, white, upper class, which means all the other stories don't get told. And so for me, the notion of time has a lot to do with what we've been told is supposedly history. It's supposed to be everybody's story, but in reality tends to focus on a small circle of people. And so when it comes to speculative fiction, when I look at magic realism, which definitely there's some bridges there, people like D.L. Brennan and Toni Morrison, there's definitely an effort by speculative artists and writers of color to bring in her stories and histories of those who were not necessarily deemed as being worthy of having their stories told. And how was it decided? Well, whose stories get to stand the test of quote-unquote time? It's whoever's in power. And so speculative fiction interrupts that. It disrupts that. It insists that we're not only going to talk about our various pasts, our various legacies, but we're also going to talk about our possible futures. And so that's what comes to my mind. And so when we talk about ancestors, we're talking about all of them, even the ones that were assholes.
And maybe you don't get to set a plate of food and a candle, you know, maybe a sharp rebuke, particularly those rapists and slave masters. But what do you do with quote unquote time, especially since a lot of those ghosts keep rising up every time we think we put them to bed. So there's no ending to that. There's just like that.
And I think Cooper also mentioned in a TED Talk, William Faulkner, who in his particular text says in a response that time is always with us, right? So I'll let you have, because you didn't answer about.
Oh, I'm just happy to be here. I did this for y'all,
So, in case anyone came in late, I played a little bit of Dr. Brittany Cooper's TED Talk in which she says that white people own time and that people of color are always operating outside of time.
I find it very interesting. I'm so glad you put that on. I've never heard it before.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Studies.
She's with the Crunk Feminists. If anyone's familiar with Crunk Feminists, that's
Yes.
Dr. Cooper.
I find it very interesting, the idea of time as white. And I think it's because time is very Eurocentric. I think it's more cultural. It's the way we understand time is Eurocentric. I've had the pleasure of being able to do a lot of traveling. I've been to many countries and I have absolutely loved traveling. What I've discovered is time, the way we understand it in America, it's very American. Our time revolves around work and production, and it's been that way since the Industrial Revolution. So time is Eurocentric, and time is very much about the dollar bill at the end of the day.
Very puritanical.
Very, very much so. And so the way that we process time and the way we say it, I say it's very Eurocentric because when I've been other places, time is not necessarily always considered linear, one thing after the next, because we're just trying to get the next thing done so that we can be finished and move on to the next task. Most places, when you do a lot of, I'm sure you all know, when you do a lot of reading in the world literature, time is really often perceived as more cyclical and patterned in circles like most things in the universe. Our universe spins. Everything moves in a cycle. Everything that we know, if you look at science, moves in cycles. The seasons move in cycles. Our bodies move in cycles. We've got a 28-day cycle. With everything that we do is secular, everything. So to suddenly have this straight line, it's not that black people live outside the timeline, it's not that people of color live outside the timeline, it's that Eurocentric view doesn't fit the way time works. It is very much obtrusive. It is breaking a system of pattern. It is very much raping the timeline. It is taking that and forcing its way through it, because the timeline, looking throughout most cultures, throughout most history, everything is coming in and out, everything has a season, everything develops at a time and dies at a time, and then when it dies, it doesn't completely die. It plants its seed and it regrows. That's just kind of the way things work. So when we're looking at things like the Orisha and all that coming back, that's just the way that human beings work. That is the way that the world works. Yes, things go away for a time, but they also come back for a time. So trying to enforce a particular way into something that's always been secular, to me, like I said, it feels like a raping of the timeline, a forcing of one's will, trying to bend the timeline to your own way. And yes, that is a very Eurocentric thing to do for the last, 600-700 years. It's been that way. But that's how people who get power are. They want to do whatever they can to remain in power. And I just feel the Eurocentric world has found a way to use time as their whip to maintain power. And now the thing is starting to kind of find balance again. I think things will eventually balance out with or without us, because that is the way time functions, and we all function within it, whether we choose to or not.
And I would say that time is also very patriarchal, right? And so women are always working against the clock, the biological clock, right? There's always a concern about the clock being against you. And who then relegates when your time is meaningful, right? And so it's a very interesting conversation about the mechanisms used, which is why I think, as you were saying earlier on, that there was a moment historically in the publishing industry where people were not receptive to it because it wasn't the time for it. Has anybody read George Schuyler before? Harlem Renaissance writer, Black No More.
Oh, yes.
And Black No More is probably one of the first Afrofuturist, right, ultraverse kind of sci-fi texts. So it's, if you've ever come across, say, Dr. Seuss's The Sneetches, with the star bellies, and they go through this machine. Well, before Dr. Seuss did it, Schuyler did this in the 1920s, in which Black people went through a machine and became white. And it was about how white communities then were resistant to all of these newly arrived albinos, as they were called. They were usually pale. And so then to prove that they were naturally white as opposed to these created whites, they tanned themselves. And so there's this whole back and forth. It's hilarious, it's a satire. If you get a chance to check it out. But I think that the time for him was also out of time because Schuyler was not as well received. He was always operating on the margins, which is why he had the, I think, latitude to do those kinds of writings, whereas everyone else was following what Langston Hughes was doing. And Langston Hughes also has a futuristic view in I Dream a World, right, and Dream Boogie. So there are Black people dreaming and envisioning these alternate universes, and I'm curious whether or not we're ever going to get to that space where those dreams become reality. Yeah.
I was going to respond to
Oh,
something you
sure.
said earlier,
Please,
but then you went
please,
last, which is
please,
great.
please.
That's a really great question, so okay, I'll be quick. No, just this piece, I have to read that story, but
It's hilarious.
it sounds amazing. But it also really, I've been studying some on there was a really early, it was basically the first, I think, American all-Black Shakespeare company. It was in New York City, and of course, white dude burned it down.
Yeah.
It's called the African Grove Theater.
Ira Aldridge was one of the people.
Yes, thank you. And so that whole history, right, of performance and then blackface becoming a thing, and then Black performers having to put on blackface. So essentially performing whiteness that was performing them,
Right.
which is really what is almost happening in that story. So it was really fascinating. There was something else I was going to say, but you had something too, so go ahead. I can't remember.
I did, but I'm gonna let
I'll
let all the smart
Please,
people talk
come on.
first.
I don't know about me, smart. I mean, book smart. That fades with age, trust me. So, like, George Schuyler, he coined this term. He first coined this term, Black Anglo-Saxons. And it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, it was sort of a slapback at the Black bourgeois.
Who Hurston called the Niggerati.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Gotta love
so-
Zora.
Right. And so, a lot of people didn't like George Schuyler because he was perceived to be this Black conservative. He was a satirist. And so that story is very typical, you know, of his style. But it had a lot more truths than people were willing to be comfortable with. This ideal or notion of the talent tent, something that was taken out of context from W.E.B. Du Bois's notion, and thinking, okay, well, the talent tent means that, okay, we're going to be treated just like rich white people, and all you guys are going to serve us. And so you have this, you know, this ideal or notion of Black people really wanting to be considered to be Black Anglo-Saxons, not just in terms of upper class, the assumption being that if you're Anglo-Saxon, then that means that you're upper class, which is not necessarily the case, but it's the perception. But also in terms of colorism, something that he had a lot to say about, since he himself was, was light-skinned himself, and so he had a lot to say about that. And so, I guess in sort of answer to your question, are we ever going to get to this point where we kind of
Get to that dream state, the dream that everyone is envisioning. Do we get there?
There's so many different dreams at this point. They're plural, which is a good sign. I don't think everybody should have the same dream. I think being able to imagine, being able to create, I think the fact that we've now got Black people, you've got Latino people, you've got Asian people who are now exploring, who are working as astronauts, working in aeronautics, who are visual artists, and that there's
some lines that are being blurred on purpose, and that's a good thing, actually, to see folks in STEM, folks in humanities being able to converse with each other. There's a march on Washington at some point, I think it's May, don't quote me on that. And the STEM people and the humanities people are marching on Washington because number 45 decided that we don't need science, we don't need to know how to read or anything. But there's something to be said about that. And so in terms of achieving dreams, it really is about dialogues. And so the question isn't, do we have dreams? The question is, are we having conversations with each other about our various dreams? Are we coordinating with each other? Are we working in collectives to see what we can include artistically, intellectually, and then on a, at a very practical, physical level? And I would say I'm seeing some things. Despite all of the horror and madness over the last 3 months, NASA has continued its explorations. NASA continues to bring in people of color, women of color, and they're actually looking at planets that may actually have folks on those planets with water, right? And so that would not even be, had we not, maybe about a century ago, considered the possibility. Right. And so we have to basically step up to the plate and offer our contributions to humanity. I think that that's what it's really all about. I think that it is important that we offer up our dreams and that we encourage our young people to continue to imagine beyond those limitations that have been imposed. And for me, that means embracing green hair, embracing white hair, and embracing berries and new ideas, because that represents something. That represents creative thinking, innovation. And so I think that I'm looking at the audience, I'm looking at the young folk, and I know one thing, there was just no way that I would have been able to enjoy all of that. I graduated from high school in '84, so it makes me kind of but back then, I was considered to be the weird person because I wore black every day. Well, it's 2017 and I still wear black every day. Now it's considered to be chic and the norm, and so.
So now you're in time.
I'm in time. And so I guess what I'm saying is that in terms of dreams, in terms of possibilities, in terms of writers and visual artists, we have a duty, actually, to push at the edge, to not conform. That's how you make dreams reality.
I'll very quickly speak on that. Yes, I concur with everything was said, but one of the things I think is very interesting about the time we're in now is the technological aspect of things. And the technology, I've said it before, the Zuckerbergs and the Twitters, these guys have done such a disservice to the control of the ruling class, because it allows people to be able to communicate, allows ideas, tweets to be able to go out, and cause massive damage, and visuals. So that's, well, I mean, they do. So that's an important thing. But I would say, one of the great things I have to tell my students all the time is that we're in a period now where a person my age would be put out to pasture. Because I'm 50, I graduated from high school in '84 too. It's true, I will be done. But what happens is that now the technology has equalized everything. So that means the systems, the checks and balances that were set up in the publishing industry, whether it be comics, literature, prose, movies, which, is a whole drama there. you know, that Get Out would not have been made 10 years ago.
Right.
Get Out would not have been made 10 years ago. Orange is the New Black would not have been made 10 years ago. The Expanse would not have, there are Negroes everywhere in the future. Apparently we live. We're not killed in the trailer before the movie even comes out, right? They got, whatever that was. So I'm just saying that what a wonderful time to be here, what a wonderful time to be able to engage. So if you're a little young or a little old, those perceptions of time no longer matter. Just, you better learn how to reboot your hard drive, update your system, and put the time in. I see a lot of young artists, Soul Rebel, if I'm not, no, I'm sorry. I've seen this as well, I'm sorry, I'm confused. Apologies about that.
Whoever you're here,
yeah,
you fly, baby.
Yeah, you're very fly. I apologize about that. But there are a lot of artists out there, Will Focus, who's great. Outstanding young artists that are out there. We have bloggers out there who are doing their thing, really, really being aggressive about just disseminating information. And we don't have to ask permission anymore. So that's a beautiful thing. So that's what I mean. I'm sorry.
By all means. I was just kind of looking, I'm in a particular unique situation compared to everyone on the panel. I'm a teacher. I wear my Twitter handles. They lock me in a room with 13-year-olds for 6 hours a day. Your Twitter drag does not scare me. But trust me, you do what I do, you're not more thug than me, I promise. But I find that as an educator, I'm in a very unique position where I get to take all these pieces, especially being not only a nerd, but an Black nerd, working with all minority children. I love the piece where I get to look at the sciences and the humanities and put it all together to create these possibilities, this speculation for my students. My third unit of the year, it's called Science and Fiction, not Science Fiction, because I combine both pieces. We start with reading canon pieces like Madeline L'Engle and A Wrinkle in Time, and then we also look at space travel. What does it mean to travel in space according to this book? They test it. Where else have you heard of Tesseract before? Oh my God, that's in the Avengers. We're about to watch the Avengers. We watch the Avengers and they read the Avengers comic, and then they compare the concept of tessering through the canon, they compare it through the comic book, they compare it to the movie, and then they have this real life thing, and their science teacher is teaching about the solar system at the same time, and then the history teacher at the same time is teaching about conquest and moving from one place in the world to another, so they have to write a story in history about what if we're moving on and doing conquest to Mars, how do we get there? So now we have this huge interdisciplinary unit, and we're looking at space travel, and now my students are able to see new worlds. They're not just learning the solar system in order, in alphabetical order, and doing a little acronym to remember it. They're not just reading a story by itself and saying, okay, this is a really great story about all these great little white kids. And it's a great story, don't get me wrong, Madeline L'Engle is an amazing author. But the fact is you get to take these pieces, and we talk about new worlds, we talk about building new worlds, we talk about creating new worlds. I get to help build the worlds of real people, these real people who are in the classroom, who have never seen outside of the city. I work in San Bernardino, California. We're one of the poorest cities in the country. I mean, in poverty like you wouldn't believe, unless you live in Detroit, like this lady right here. She believed it. Oh, so San Bernardino, don't trip. I love my people and I love where I'm from. But these kids, they don't get to see outside their neighborhood. They really don't. So we get this opportunity with speculative fiction to really show people the world. And now I have kids who, their whole family is in jail. Their whole family is in and out of the jails and the gangs and all this kind of stuff. And now they want to be an engineer and build a rocket because they got to read that and they got to see it. And they really want to investigate these concepts. So it has a real world effect on especially minority children. When they get to see themselves, when they get to see and touch these worlds. That's why I particularly love the children. I didn't know who you were when I got on this panel. So many of my students, I love your work. I'm a big fan. So yeah.
That's amazing.
It is. And so having these films, having these books where these kids can see themselves in the future, and they've never had that possibility. It changes worlds, it changes lives, and I am in a lucky position where I get to actually see those changes happen, where I get to see the eyes light up, and they're like, wow. That person has magic and they're Black and they're not a fairy, or wow, this Latina character, or oh my God, she's a girl and she's not a princess. It's amazing to my students to see these kind of things. and it changes who they are, and it changes how they see things. So I find you guys do the work of speculative fiction. I do the work of feeding it to the populace. And when you may not see the effect that it has on the world, but I get to watch it change people. And if you do not believe, trust me, sit in the classroom, it changes people. It is so necessary, especially at that age, to have speculative fiction out there, because every kid, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what sex you are, I don't care your orientation, every kid needs to see the possibility that they have to change things. And it is just world changing to watch.
I have a question for Daniel. Oh, you want something to say?
Well, I just want to say shout out to the teachers.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you for that. And I want to tell you that, when I was in the 7th grade, so around that same age, Mrs. Inez Middleton, who everyone was terrified of and totally in love with at the same time, like the best teachers, because she threatened to hang us out the window by our fingernails if we messed up. And everyone believed her. We were like, oh, you will. Yeah, there was no question about that. And she had a heart condition, so she was constantly eating garlic, like all the time. It was intense. Anyway, she took me aside one day, and I'll never know why, too, because she passed, but she took me aside one day and just gave me an Octavia Butler book for no reason that I could ever imagine. At that point, if you had told me I would grow up to be a science fiction writer who does the work I do, I would have been like, what? That's possible? But she gave me this book and blew my entire mind. And it was, I always say it's like she either planted a seed or a time bomb, depending on your mood. But I read it and it blew my mind, but I had no idea what to do with it. I was a kid. And then literally 15 years later, I was sitting on the ambulance because I was working as a paramedic, trying to figure out what the fuck to do with my life. And I was like, oh shit, Octavia Butler. Went ahead and read all of her work and, thus named the school that the kids in Shadow Shaper go to, Octavia Butler High. And, she's very much just become like, she is already just, the patron saint of all of us, I think. But it was so deep. And that's why I just always, teachers are magic, and y'all are doing God's work on so many levels. So, it really takes us coming at this from so many different places. And so it's really heartening to hear you say that and to hear your passion.
I have 2 questions. I think we only have time left for one, and this is kind of a big one. I once said in one of my classes, I said that the dystopia we see in American popular culture, thinking of like the Hunger Games or the Divergent series, I said to my students one semester, I said the dystopia that white people imagine is everyday life for people of color.
Yep.
I said, yes.
Pretty much.
Can you say it again so we can tweet it?
Oh, you can quote me on that. Now I drop jewels in my classes all the time. Shout out to all my students in the audience. Okay, so I'll quote it again. I said the dystopia that white authors imagine is the everyday lives of people of color.
Yes.
I said, so we don't, like the stuff that we see in these dystopic novels, these are just people of color's lives on the regular. And so I said this very interesting, narrative. It's like, well, let me imagine myself white being oppressed by an institution, right? I mean, that's Hunger Games, that's Divergent, that's every day for us. It's not, our lives are dystopic from the moment we're in utero, right? And so when we talk about utopia, I'm really curious where, in terms of this speculative art, what kind of world do we imagine? What is utopia for us? Because all we've known is dystopia. So where is our utopia and what does it look like? Is it Blackland? If you've ever read Aaron McGruder's comic novel with the Hudlin brothers, it's hilarious, right? Is it Blackland? Is it, some racial utopia? I'm thinking of some of the people that have tried to envision a world where there's no oppression or where there's no marginalization. I don't know, but I think I'd like to end on that note before we get to some questions. So, what is our utopia? What kind of utopia do you envision? Is there utopia for us?
First of all, I want to add into that really excellent truth that you just dropped, that it makes it even more ironic because it is their dystopia is the reality that people of color live every day, plus there's no race analysis.
Right.
Right.
So it's like on
That's what
top
I'm saying.
of, right,
Yeah.
on top of giving us like what we know to be true as a science fiction thing, you're also being like, everybody loves each other, and it's great, and you're like, motherfucker, no. And that really is what bothers me about some of those things, because they're purportedly telling us the truth about this hard truth about how bad things are gonna get, and they, warning us and all this stuff. And A, it's already true, and B, you're acting like we either A, don't exist at all, or B, are just, we all get along, right, in this fantasy racetopia that doesn't exist, and won't, as long as we keep pretending we don't exist. So there's that. But I also think, I guess, and also in relation to your last question, and especially since we're talking about time, I think that on many levels, like, we are constantly living in a state of victory, as much as we are also living in an ongoing dystopia. Like, both truths are very real for us side by side. And I think that where I find utopia is in resistance and in the beloved community that we've created and that is really flourishing right now, as we've been speaking about. That's, when I get into spaces like this, when I see spaces created like Bona, like the different, like the fact that at Comic-Con there was an Afrofuturist event, like those moments where we thrive, that event at Princeton a couple years ago, which was incredible, about Afrofuturism, those are utopic spaces to me. So I don't think it's so much about we arrive at this particular moment and then we've crossed into the promised land and everything is good. I think we're constantly moving through, stepping in and out. It's a dance, we are ongoing, we are oppressed, we oppress sometimes, and and we survive, and in our survival there is beauty and there is rhythm and there is dance and all of these things, and that is the beautiful struggle.
So for me, to be fair, the Hunger Games film completely watched the book.
Right.
The protagonist is clearly Native, and Rue is a Black girl, and all the communities are Black people. So that's Hollywood's fault for making things even more trash.
Right.
As a filmmaker, I can say that and apologize, even though it's not my fault. But I would say, so I thought about a lot of things. I thought about two people. I thought about Nina Simone, and I thought about James Baldwin. Nina Simone said that all she wants to feel is be free. She just wants that sense of freedom. And it's like, the interviewer asked her, well, what does that mean? And she was like, you know what that means. You know what I mean? You know what that means. We know what that means too, because we know we don't have it, right? And James Baldwin said, to be conscious in the US is to be in a constant state of anger. So like, what I see as as the perfect utopia is collectively feeling that sense of freedom. That sense of like in the Hunger Games, like all oppressed people just like,
Right.
and just like fucking news feeds and net screens all over like in Beijing and fucking Syria. Just like, finally, right? And then also to not, and Solange too, to not be so angry and so weary. We're tired. Yeah. And yeah, it's just that, and it has to be collective, because you think to yourself, well, I could just leave and live somewhere, and it's like, yeah, I say that because I'm an educated Black person, and we have to keep in mind socioeconomic privilege more than anything. And so no, you're not free if you get to move to Cape Town and no one else gets to, right? And so it's that collective breath.
Right. The exhale.
Yeah.
Crown, please.
Come on, Brad.
Right, we gotta wrap up. We're almost out of time. We out of time, right, Machine? Okay.
Well, my only thing with time and speculative and everything, since we are wrapping up, my whole purpose for co-founding BSAM was to make sure that my people, because I don't feel guilty for focusing on my people.
Hello.
I don't feel guilty for being unapologetic as fuck about
Hello.
having everything that I feel being about my people, the people that my son looks like. The whole purpose of BSAM was to make sure that we started a movement that nobody else was doing, nobody else was trying to do, nobody else had even tried to do, nor even thought of doing, was to start a movement of conventions and events that focus not only on speculative fiction, which is what we talked about for the majority of this panel, but also social politics, also Black film, also Black comics, also novels, also just everything that Afrofuturism entails, because that's really what BSAM is about. BSAM is 99% Afrofuturism. When I built this panel, I wanted to make sure that we were fully diverse with all aspects. Regine helped me pull Vinay. Vinay is an educator. Tim is comics. Jose he writes novels. She does film. She's a scholar. I'm just here to hustle and my hair is cute. You know, we wanted to make sure that this panel was completely diverse in what BSAM entails. So, you know, I'm so grateful that all of you all came. Everybody's hair is cute. I'm all here with a Kanisha. So I'm just so happy that you all came, and thank you so much. And just make sure that whatever you do, whatever your culture is, be unapologetic about it. You know, when people come at me and say, you know, Crown, why does everything have to be Black? I'm like, why the fuck does it not have to be? Why is that a problem? You know, so be assured in yourself and your strength, and make sure whatever you're doing it for the cultivation of your people and your community.
And that's utopia.
That's
your utopia.
That's utopia. This mic is off, so I'm going to talk 2 minutes.
Do we have a question or a comment? I covered a lot. I had more to go, and I said, all right, we got to wrap up. But I see a hand.
So, shout out to the
Please stand up. If you can. Okay, thank you.
So the question that I have is something that I talked to Daniel about a little bit before, but you know, you've got a couple different like styles of creation on the panel, so I wanted to address it a little bit. I'm also an educator. I work with middle school students and
Girl.
yes,
Nobody in this room feels me but you.
and so the struggle that I always have is convincing my administrators. Like I had a meeting with my principal this morning and said, I'm going to this convention, I'm going to go get resources, I'm going to find ways that my students who look like me can see themselves in their literature. And like I'm fighting with her about Shadow Shaper because she's like, oh, this is a little bit of an older text. And I'm like, what? Yeah.
Because of my last name?
Listen.
It came out 2 years ago.
No, but older as in like the kids are a little bit.
Okay, can I help? Can I respond to you?
Please.
Okay, so my job paid for me to be here. Let me tell you how this works.
Give me the thing.
You don't stop. When I first started doing this, you know, you should have been in my workshop this morning. I get a lot of the, I don't need the microphone, I'm loud.
All right.
I'm actually law enforcement, I can get it out. I got a lot of the, you know, that's not really canon, this is the way it's been. People do things the way they've always been done because they've always done it. I am an English teacher. You want to know what I learned? Shakespeare and Poe. Don't get me wrong, I love me some Shakespeare, I love Poe, but you know what, my kids don't, that's not their world. And what we get in the classroom, we're getting this false idea that we need to teach what's always been taught, we need to do what's always been done because it's always been done. What the school system has always done has been failing kids for generations. Not just our kids, it has been failing all children. 60% of the population do not make it through our secondary system, which tells you it's broken. I don't care, I work for the broken system, but I do not perpetuate that broken system. When I get in my classroom, I close my door and I do me. Because the only people at the end of the day I'm responsible to are the people in those chairs. I am building the next generation of citizens. So you know what, the first set of books, when I first taught the Hunger Games, we were gonna get on the Hunger Games. I bought the books myself. I didn't ask nobody for nothing. I crowdfunded and paid for those books, and I got those books. And I teach it, yeah, I teach it with canon text. Yes, I teach it with Greek myth because it is very aligned with Greek myth. Yes, I teach it with Shirley Jackson's The Lottery because it's pretty much the same story. I can teach the canon and then teach this modern text that will engage my students. And then we look at it in comparison to different things in the comic books. We look at the fact that District 11 is slavery. We looked at the fact that I asked my kids the question, what race are these characters? Prove it in the text, because I have to teach them how to cite textual evidence. They have to go in and prove it, and then they find out, wait a minute, Katniss has brown skin and long dark hair, and she's not white. Wait a minute, why is that lady playing Katniss? And then I have to tell them, I don't know, why is she? Make an inference. We're scholars, infer why she's portrayed that way. You know what? I ain't good at my job, but I do what I do for my babies. So do what you do. Close your doors. When my kids walked in my classroom, they think I'm just teaching reading and writing. I'm teaching you how to be a human being. I'm teaching you what the world really looks like. Because if I show you only within my textbook, look, my kids ain't never read the textbook. Not a once. And they ain't gonna start. Because if I teach you within the textbook, you are going to read nothing about middle class, Caucasian people. And yeah, they exist, but they don't exist in San Bernardino. So what am I doing teaching this to you? That is not their world. It is not my world. It is not most of the world. So as an educator, you know, we have to do what our administrators say until they walk out the room and close the door. Do you? Do what's necessary.
And on that note, thank you for coming to Black Speculative Arts Media.
One second, everybody. We actually will have the BSAM convention April 22nd at Bronx Museum, so we really hope to see you.